Buck up, soldier. I got the material for your dress.
The blue or the red?
The red.
Hot damn.
Today we are going back to a name that the second that opening theme starts playing seems to bring an entire era of American television back to life right in front of you. MASH, the classic series that premiered in 1972. Sharp dialogue, graceful humor, and characters that once you love them are very hard to forget. But what makes MASH memorable is not just what happened on screen. The real question is this: how clearly do you remember this show? And how much do you know about what happened behind it? From the dirt cheap price and the rough way it was treated at the beginning, this classic war comedy still has a whole pile of strange facts most of us missed. So put on your helmet and come with me through the 20 most unbelievable ones. Number 20. MASH was about Korea, but the public always thought of Vietnam. I have always thought this was the strangest thing about MASH. Officially, this show is about the Korean War. The uniforms are Korean War uniforms. The camp is a Korean War camp. The helicopters landing in the compound belong to the Korean War too. But when it hit the air in 1972, American audiences were not living inside memories of the early 50s anymore. They were living inside the exhaustion, the doubt, and the grief of the Vietnam era. So what they saw on screen was not just a medical camp in Asia. They were seeing America itself at one of its most confused moments. Of course, the show did not change its setting just to please the audience. It also did not turn itself into a political speech. It just told the story of a few doctors, a few nurses, a few people hanging on to laughter to get through the hardest kind of days. And that calm approach is exactly what made it hit harder. Alan Alda put it perfectly. On paper, it was about Korea. In spirit, it was about every war. And if that still is not strange enough, here comes the part that really is. MASH ran for 11 years. The war it was portraying lasted only about 3 years, 1 month, 2 days. A series that lived far longer than the war it was about. To me, that paradox alone says something important. It was never just a war show. It was America, looking back at itself. And speaking of lasting that long, the beginning of this show was even harder to believe. Let us go straight to number 19 and that shockingly cheap price tag. Number 19. MASH was once sold for an almost unbelievable bargain. Some prices are so cheap they barely sound real. With MASH, that number was around $500 an episode. That is said to be what Richard Hooker, meaning H, Richard Hornberger received when the television rights were sold. Hearing that now, it almost feels wrong. Not wrong because of the number itself. Wrong because the number is so tiny compared to what came after it. Then that title went from page to feature film. And from feature film to a series that lasted 11 seasons, 256 episodes, and sat in the memory of American television much longer than plenty of shows that were promoted far more loudly than it ever was. Put those two things side by side, and you realize just how strange this story really is. On one side, a few $100s an episode. On the other, a cultural legacy people are still talking about all these years later. Hollywood loves to talk about instinct, about spotting the thing that is going to turn to gold. MASH is a pretty sharp reminder that sometimes Hollywood misses the mark just like anybody else. And if that was already hard to believe, the way the network treated MASH in the early days was even rougher. So brace yourself, because your favorite show was treated pretty badly at first. Number 18. MASH almost got left for dead, right out of the gate. People like to believe every legend enters the world through the front door. MASH did not. CBS and Fox looked at it with a pretty cold eye. Alan Alda remembered that the cast was given only a small stage because nobody thought this show was going anywhere. It was so bad they did not even have their own bathrooms for 6 years. That tells you everything you need to know about where MASH ranked in the network's mind at the beginning. It was not treated like a major gamble. It was treated like something closer to go ahead and make it. And we will see later. Then the first season got tossed into Sunday night, which was a terrible slot for a series that unusual. Jamie Farr said there were 65 primetime shows at the time, and MASH came in at number 57. After that first year, everybody on the set kept hearing the same rumor this show could very easily be canceled. It was only after CBS moved it to Saturday night that the whole thing started to turn. From a struggling show, it climbed right into the top group and never looked back. So now you know this legendary show once had to fight just to stay alive. And if you are a Klinger fan, take a deep breath before I tell you number 17. Number 17. Klinger was almost a one-episode character and then gone.
Colonel Potter.
Anybody here a fan of this charming guy? If you are like me and the minute Klinger walks in, the whole camp feels different, then this one will make you break out in a sweat. Because originally Jamie Farr's Klinger was written for exactly one episode. Just one. Show up cause some chaos, then disappear like any other oddball passing through MASH. And the more you think about it, the more you realize what a loss that would have been. Klinger was not just funny. He had a kind of charm you could not really replace. The way he walked in wearing dresses, talked like everything was perfectly normal, and dreamed up one plan after another to get sent home that could very easily have become a one-note joke and then been tossed aside. But Klinger did not stop there. Jamie Farr brought something warm, quick, and deeply human to that character. So he did not just make people laugh, he stayed. And speaking of behind-the-scenes stories that turned in ways nobody expected, the battles between the writers and the cast were just as interesting. Number 16. The writers once got revenge on the cast for script notes. On a lot of sets, actors giving notes on the script is normal enough. But on MASH, things got to a point where the writers chose a response that was both polite and unforgettable. Ken Levine said that when the cast kept sending in one little note after another, he and David Isaacs went back into the writer's room and rewrote the script into a cold weather show. On paper, it was a winter story set in Korea. The next day, the company went out to the ranch in Malibu to shoot as usual. Only now, Malibu was blazing hot with temperatures regularly hitting 90 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Meanwhile, the cast had to wear heavy parkas, stand around fire barrels, and seriously deliver lines about the brutal freezing cold of the Korean front. Just picturing it is funny enough already. One of the smartest shows in American television ended up getting even with each other by forcing people to sweat inside winter gear. Levine said that happened maybe 2 times, and after that, the nitpicky notes almost disappeared. Strange and pretty funny too, right? Number 15, Alan Alda is said to have helped keep Father Mulcahy on the show. This is not one of those behind-the-scenes stories that makes you laugh. This is the kind that makes you respect somebody more. Early in Season 5, William Christopher came down with a severe case of hepatitis that nearly killed him and forced him to miss a few episodes. During that time, there was discussion that Father Mulcahy might be written out altogether. Just hearing that is enough to send a chill through you, because anybody who watched the show knows Mulcahy was never the loud character. He was the quiet part, the decent part, the part that kept warmth inside the show when everything else felt exhausted. But do not worry too much, because Alan Alda fought to keep William Christopher there. Not just because he cared about his fellow actor, but because he knew Christopher needed stable work to help support his autistic son. There are moments in this business when all people look at is the shooting schedule, the contract, which role is still useful, which one should go. But here, somebody looked at the human being first. Number 14. Wayne Rogers left MASH, and the lawsuit that followed turned into a contract farce. We can file this one under the most mischievous behind-the-scenes stories imaginable. Wayne Rogers left MASH production, got angry, and the whole thing moved toward a lawsuit because they believed he had broken his contract. But then the story swerved in a direction so strange, it almost sounds too odd to write into a script. It turned out Wayne Rogers had never signed a written contract at all. Just think about that. This was a major American television series on a major network backed by a major studio. And yet, when they all started fighting over the contract, they discovered the most important piece of paper had never actually been signed. So the lawsuit almost collapsed on the spot, not because Rogers won some thrilling courtroom battle, but because basically there was no official signed contract standing there to sue over in the first place. Number 13. There is a touching reason Radar's hand was always partly hidden. If you watch MASH long enough, sooner or later, you start noticing one tiny detail about Radar. He is often holding something. A clipboard. Some little prop. Sometimes he is just standing at an angle or keeping a hand in his pocket. The first time you catch it, it is easy to think that is just an acting habit that fits Radar's nervous, sweetly awkward nature. But once you know the story behind it, it makes Gary Burghoff even easier to admire. Burghoff had a congenital difference in his left hand, often mentioned along with Poland syndrome. And all through his time on MASH, he found quiet, skillful ways to hide it on screen. No fuss, no turning it into something the audience had to focus on. He simply adjusted the way he stood, the way he held props, the way he moved the character through a scene so Radar would still feel natural. Number 12. A lot of the actors wore sneakers instead of army boots. On screen, the 4077th is full of soldiers, surgeons, combat boots, dirt, and military discipline. In real life, a lot of the actors were not especially interested in army boots at all. The reason was pretty simple. Boots were stiff-heavy and they made an annoying amount of noise on the stage floor. And when you are shooting television, the camera is not always taking the full body anyway. A lot of scenes only go from the waist up. So under that very proper military frame, plenty of people were really wearing sneakers, just to keep their feet lighter and the day easier. The audience saw military discipline. The actors just wanted to get through a long shooting day without suffering any extra for a pair of boots. It sounds small, but it is exactly the kind of secret that makes you smile when you go back and watch. From now on, every time you see Hawkeye or Trapper standing there looking perfectly official in camp, maybe you will picture a pair of sneakers just outside the edge of the frame. Number 11. In the entire 4077th camp, only one person was never absent. Alright, this one is for the real MASH fans. Who was the only person there in every single episode? Think carefully before you answer, because this is the kind of question that makes people guess wrong. A lot of people go straight to Loretta Swit. Fair enough. She was there through all 11 seasons attached to the show so completely, she almost became part of the 4077th itself. Other people guess Radar because it feels like he had been there forever. But no, there was only one person who went the whole distance from the first episode to the last, Alan Alda. And really, this is not just some fun trivia question. It tells you exactly who MASH revolved around all those years. The show changed people, changed rhythms, said goodbye to some characters, and welcomed others. But Hawkeye was still standing there, mocking, exhausted, joking, nearly collapsing whatever the moment required. If MASH was a long journey, then Alan Alda was the one who walked the whole road with the audience. And Loretta Swit really did come close. She was there in all 11 seasons, but she still missed a few episodes. So if you answered Alan Alda right away a minute ago, congratulations. You really do belong at the 4077th. Now come with me into the second half of today's list. Number 10. Part of the MASH cast had real military experience in real life. Maybe you did not know this. Part of the cast in this show were not just playing military people. They had actually served in real life too. Alan Alda was in the Army Reserve. Jamie Farr served in the military. Wayne Rogers was in the Navy. Mike Farrell was in the Marine Corps. Once I learned that MASH suddenly felt even more real to me. There were people here who truly knew what military life felt like. And that gave the show a very natural layer of authenticity. And speaking of behind the scenes, MASH stories, there is another one that is even funnier. It is about the point where the writers started running out of ideas. Number 9. The writers ran so low on ideas, they started borrowing baseball rosters. At a certain point, even a show as smart as MASH ran into a very ordinary problem. They started running out of names for characters. Just picture a series going year after year, patients coming and going, non-stop, soldiers passing through constantly, every episode needing fresh faces to fill up that 4077th camp. Sooner or later, those writers were bound to look at each other and realize the supply of names in their heads had run dry. And that is when the story gets even more amusing. The MASH writers' room apparently turned to baseball rosters for help, including players from the Los Angeles Dodgers in 1978. I love that detail because it is both funny and very real. People like to imagine writers living all day inside big ideas, razor-sharp dialogue, and episodes that are both hilarious and painful. Then one day, they are sitting there flipping through baseball names just to rescue a scene. Number 8. In Britain, MASH aired without a laugh track, and viewers liked it better. When the show aired in Britain, it was shown without the laugh track. No canned laughter jumping in to tell the audience where the joke was supposed to land. And strangely enough, A lot of people felt that version fit MASH much better. At one point, the BBC accidentally aired the version with the laugh track, and viewers reacted immediately. They complained because that sound ruined the atmosphere of the show. And when you think about it, that really is not hard to understand. MASH was never the kind of comedy where you just toss out a punchline and wait for a laugh. What made it work was its own rhythm. Sometimes the humor was dry, sometimes bitter. Sometimes you would laugh and then feel something catch in your throat a second later. Dropping canned laughter into moments like that feels like someone standing beside you the whole time, nudging your arm and saying, "Laugh here, this part is funny." For a show like MASH, that kind of thing can actually break the mood. And honestly, I have always thought that is the sign of a high-quality comedy. A genuinely funny show does not need anyone laughing for it. It knows how to find the audience on its own. MASH was exactly that kind of show. It did not need a laugh track. It was already smart enough to do the work by itself. Number 7. Loretta Swit refused to let Margaret stay. Just hot lips. This is one of my favorite changes in MASH, because it did not come from some giant shock or a cast swap. It came from an actor refusing to let her character stand still. At the beginning, Margaret Houlihan could have been trapped very easily in one box. Tough, rigid, combative, and almost there just so other people could needle her with the nickname Hot Lips. Loretta Swit understood that. She wanted Margaret to grow, to deepen, to become a real person, instead of just a walking nickname. And that is something I really admire. Because season by season, Margaret changed. Still strong, still proud, still not exactly easy. But underneath all that was a woman who became smarter, more independent, and more dignified. She stopped being just the target of jokes. She became one of the most fully grown characters in the entire show. Number 6, Trapper, was originally written as Hawkeye's equal, but MASH shifted its center along the way. This is a really fascinating example of a show finding its true center as it goes. When Wayne Rogers took the role of Trapper John, the original plan was pretty clear. Trapper would not stand behind Hawkeye. The two of them were meant to be a pair equal in weight, equal in rhythm, sharing the burden of carrying MASH. And if you just look at the starting point, that makes perfect sense. But then the show started running, and things shifted on their own. Alan Alda did not just stand out as a performer, he kept bringing more and more into Hawkeye. The rhythm, the tone, the way the character looked at the world, and a steadily growing emotional weight. So without anybody needing to officially declare it, the show simply started leaning more and more toward Hawkeye. Trapper was still good, still charming, still a huge part of those early years. But the balance had changed. Number 5. Henry Blake died on MASH, and a few days later had to go on television to say he was alive. This may be the kind of absurdity only American television of that era could produce. MASH had just stunned the audience with Abyssinia Henry. The whole country was still reeling from Henry Blake being killed off in a way that felt brutally sudden, shockingly harsh, and almost impossible to swallow. Viewers were furious. Phones rang non-stop. The backlash came in from everywhere. And then the whole thing turned from tragedy into a kind of oddity that is almost hard to believe. A few days later, McLean Stevenson appeared on Cher's show. Not as a star who had just left a hit series. He appeared as Henry Blake sitting in a lifeboat shouting to the audience, "Everybody, I am okay. I am okay." Just thinking about that image is both hilarious and deeply strange. A character had just died on screen, and then the actor playing him had to come back to life on another program just to calm viewers down. At that point, it was not just a plot twist anymore. It was a shock that had spilled out into real life. Number 4. Even the writers sometimes forgot the names of characters' wives. Can you believe this? Larry Gelbart once admitted that the MASH writers at times forgot the names they had given the characters' wives. That is how Henry Blake's wife ends up being Lorraine in one place and Mildred in another. It sounds funny, but it is also easy to understand. A long-running series like MASH has people coming and going all the time, names flying around constantly. And sooner or later, the writer's room is bound to lose track of some small detail. And MASH lost track of something as everyday as the name of a character's wife. Maybe that is part of what makes the show so unique. Number 3. The final episode of MASH set a nearly impossible record. This is the number every MASH fan has every right to be proud of. The series finale pulled about 60.2% of the rating and drew 125 million viewers. In other words, when MASH said goodbye, it felt like nearly the whole country sat down to watch. I have always thought that was a beautiful achievement, not just because the number is enormous, but because it says something very simple. MASH was not merely a successful show. It was a piece of people's lives. They were not tuning in just to see how it ended. They were tuning in to say goodbye to something that had been with them for years. Number 2. MASH did not keep going because the cast voted to end it together. This is something I have always admired about MASH. The show was not dropped in the middle. It also was not dragged out forever, just because it was still successful. Near the end, the cast themselves supported the decision to close the series, instead of trying to squeeze a few more years out of it. They were close in real life. They understood the show from the inside, and I think they also knew very clearly when a story had reached the point where it should stop. That makes even more sense when the team started meeting real MASH veterans, listening to their stories, hearing what they remembered, and then weaving some of those memories into the show. That gave the series even more depth. But at the same time, everybody understood one simple truth: not every emotional current can be stretched out forever. Eventually, the fresh ideas begin to thin, and the most respectful thing you can do for a show you love is let it stop at the right moment. I always respect a series that knows how to do that. Knowing when to begin is hard enough. Knowing when to end is much harder. And strangely enough, just as MASH was preparing to say goodbye, something happened in real life that still feels as if the show itself had written its own ending. Number 1. The MASH set really burned down right before the finale. Some stories about MASH sound like something the writers would invent on purpose just to give the show a perfect ending. But this one is real. Right before production on the final episode period, a wildfire swept through the outdoor set at Malibu Creek, the place where the 4077th camp had stood for years, and burned almost all of it down. What viewers later saw was not some clever piece of production design. It was what was left of a place that had truly disappeared. Maybe that is why this fact has always left me with such a strange feeling. It is not loud. It does not hit you the way some of the crazier behind-the-scenes stories do. It is just sad, in a very cinematic way. A show that had lived for more than a decade reached the point of saying goodbye, and then the home that held it all vanished first. Fox did not rebuild the set. The remaining work had to be moved indoors. That is why so many of those final scenes feel more enclosed, darker, quieter, almost as if the show itself knew it was nearing the end. And that is why, whenever I look back at MASH, this story feels both strange and heartbreakingly right. A series about war loss and separation. And in the end, even the place that carried all those memories was gone too. Not through some written farewell, but through real fire. The deeper I go into MASH, the more I feel like this is not the kind of show people just watch once and move on from. It stays. It stays because it was so smart. It stays because it was funny in places nobody expected. And it stays because behind those lines that could cut like a razor, there was always this deeply human sadness that Golden Age American television knew how to do so, unbelievably well. Honestly, the more I tell these stories, the stranger MASH feels to me than it does in the memory most viewers carry of it. Now it is your turn. Out of everything we just went through, which fact surprised you the most? Which one makes you want to pull MASH back up tonight? And if you are a longtime fan of the 4077th, I genuinely want to hear this too. What detail about the show has stayed with you all these years? Or what personal memory do you tie to it that other people may not know? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoy sitting down, dusting off an old Hollywood monument, and then discovering there were even more stories inside it than you expected, then subscribe to the channel. We still have a lot of films worth going back to.
But there is something interesting about the shows that live the longest in our memories. The more familiar they feel, the easier it is to think we already know everything about them. But behind it, there is an entire layer of backstage stories that many viewers have never heard. So today, we are heading back to Hazard County and uncovering the most fascinating secrets behind the Dukes of Hazzard. And trust me, a few of them may make you see this series in a completely different way.